Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage INSA Executive Vice President John Doyen.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed the breakout sessions this afternoon and also had time to get out and see our exhibitors in the hallway. We're going to close this year's summit with a forward-looking conversation, Reimagining the Arsenal, a new era for the defense industrial base. As you know, the defense industrial base is at an inflection point. The pace of technological change is accelerating, and the ability to rapidly bring innovations to the mission will determine whether we stay ahead of our adversaries. This is more than evolution, it's transformation. And getting it right is critical for the future of our national security. We're fortunate today to have a truly distinguished group of leaders joining us for this discussion. The Honorable Ellen Lord, former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Gilman Louie, Chief Executive Officer of America's Frontier Fund, Susanne Hake, General Manager, U.S. Government for Maxar, Nick Thompson, who leads the Special Activities business at Saronic Technologies. Also guiding the discussion today is our moderator, AJ Bertone, who's managing partner at In-Q-Tel. AJ has long been at the forefront of connecting cutting-edge technology with mission needs, and he's the perfect person to lead today's conversation. Please join me in welcoming AJ and our panelists to the stage.
Well, thank you, John. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for our last conversation of the day and for our last conversation of 2 days of great engagement here at the INSA conference. As John just mentioned, as we wrap up, we want to look forward to reimagining the arsenal and contemplating the future of the defense industrial base. I think this audience can appreciate that the world around us is changing very quickly. Technology is evolving at breakneck speed, and that evolution in technology is also informing an evolution in modern warfare. There's a flywheel that's spinning around this where changes in technology are changing warfare, and warfare is then changing in technology. And that is a dynamic that the defense industrial base has never seen before. When you layer in changes to the threat landscape, whether it's great power competition focused on China or maybe something more regional, I think it's likely that the next war is not going to look like the war we've been fighting for the past couple of decades. And so we're standing on a burning platform, and there's an opportunity ahead to reimagine the defense industrial base as we know it today. And that's what we're going to unpack in our conversation today. I've got an absolutely great group of co-panelists up here with me to have that conversation, and we're going to go ahead and get right into it. I'd like to start a little bit around outlining the case for change and kind of the current state of affairs. Ellen, you're a former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. Before your time in government, you spent a lot of time in private industry. I think you've got a really, really interesting blended background for this conversation. I know you've stayed in touch with this topic since you left office. I'm curious, maybe just catch us up, particularly on the gov side. How do you kind of see the current state of affairs and where things are today?
Thanks, AJ, and thank you for including me in this. I think at this stage with this administration, this Congress, directionally, we're moving where we need to go, speeding capability to the warfighter at more cost-effective prices. However, I think the execution's been a tad sporty, if you will. And why is that? Because, first of all, we're not confirming the politicals very quickly to get them into the Pentagon, and that tends to slow a lot of activity down when career govies don't have the person leading them to say, yes, go do this. And that's a problem both from the administration side, slow to do nominations in many cases, and then on the congressional side, very slow to vote out of the full Senate for political reasons, often having nothing to do with the individuals themselves. But although directionally we're saying the right thing, there are all kinds of executive orders about using commercial technology, buying commercial software. I think people in the building are so busy answering the mail, if you will, on all the EOs that they're not having time to do the work that needs to be done. And frankly, nothing happens in this ecosystem until you get dollars on contract. And it's been a little bit of a rough go, particularly for venture-backed companies. Gilman knows a whole lot about this in the last 9 months or so because the dollars aren't flowing. I think we have an enormous window to do things that's quickly diminishing. So enormous opportunity, but we need to make sure that we are motivating and rewarding contracting officers to make choices and get going, to really award commercial contracts. But right now, the motivations and rewards aren't there for doing that for those who are trained well enough to know how to do it. So I'd say directionally correct, but a little slow, and lots of examples I could give as we go along.
Thanks, that's great initial framing. Nick, I'll maybe come to you. Ellen talked about the challenges that venture-backed startups are maybe facing. You're leading a special activities business at Saronic, a very high-profile maritime autonomy venture-backed startup. How do you see things from your perspective? You also, interestingly, have worn the uniform in the past too, so you're now, bring some of your past military experience to your job in the venture-backed world. What's your sense for where things are and the opportunity and challenges?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, AJ. Thank you, panel teammates, ladies and gentlemen. Special thank you to Susanne for including me today. So Saronic Technologies, I'm going to start with a scene setter with China. Right now, they're outpacing us 230 vessels to 1. Congressional mandate to have 355 vessels in the fleet. We're short of it. We're building some exquisite vessels, but we're decommissioning more than we're building. So Saronic Technologies, we build autonomous surface vessels. We built the smartest ones that exist in the world today. The product lineup is from 6 feet to 150 feet. We're venture-backed capital that enables us to read requirements and then start building. So kind of the theme of some of the things that I'll be talking about today are speed and scale. And we really don't have time to wait much longer.
All right, so we've got a little bit of lay of the land from the gov side and startup side. And Gilman, Ellen was already pointing to you. You're a money guy, former entrepreneur and longtime venture capitalist, former CEO of InQtel many years ago, and now the founder of America's Frontier Fund, which invests in national interests and national security technologies. How do you assess the financial landscape for dual-use and defense technologies?
Well, I mean, this is a hot category, right? Saronic, Anduril, these are companies that are, as you would say, rocking it. And that's created a lot of other interests of capital coming in. Now, the reality, though, is if we can't speed up the acquisitions or use special vehicles, more than just OTAs, to get these things online, that capital could easily dry up. So that's one challenge. This week, it'd be good to be a defense tech company because we kind of run in herds. I think the second part of this, which is going to be critical for our ability to actually have a DIB that's actually functional, is we need scale capital, right? And it's great. We've got all these great startups. You're very well structured and funded. A few others are. But many of these new technology companies have no ability to manufacture, no ability to find capital to build next generation factory lines. So we have to solve that problem. So I think it's going to be venture. I think there's going to be government capital. I think it's debt capital and other kinds of instruments. We need a full stack, and then the government on the other side has to match it, because the primes are really good at operating within the DOW's current acquisition framework. Mm-hmm. That framework is ill-suited for companies built around cash flow.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to come back to this later as we move along in the conversation. Susanne, you're leading public sector at Maxar. I think Maxar is a really interesting business. It is definitionally dual use, big part commercial, big part defense. You've previously worked at places like Palantir and Booz. I think, again, got a great group of panelists that are coming from multiple worlds. As you see it, where is the government particularly struggling to translate some of the most innovative things that are happening maybe in the commercial sector? Otherwise, where is the government really struggling to bring things over into their world?
Yeah, and I know we're going to spend a lot of time today on some of these topics. I think when I first think about dual use, what I would highlight is sort of what the intent of dual use really is, right? So that's companies spending their own IRAD, their own dollars to develop capabilities that can be used for commercial or government use cases. And that's kind of the first way that you can think about where's the best way to innovate. So, for Maxar, for example, we're not focused on just developing a solution only for the government or only for commercial, but how do we come up with the best solutions that can be tailored? So thinking about, for example, use cases like site monitoring or something. In a US government context, we could take a site monitoring solution and monitor missile launch sites. In a commercial context, you could monitor like an oil and gas refinery or 3D data. In a USG context, you could build out virtual training environments. In a government or a commercial context, you could think about insurance in disaster relief. And so really thinking about how do we develop the best solutions, the best things to take to market first, and then kind of tailoring it. So I think to kind of come back to your question, it's not which of our USG or commercials moving faster. Like we try to bring the best capabilities to any of our customers.
That's great. Maybe to everybody, but first perhaps Gilman, we were talking about this before coming on stage, and we were, I won't say joking, but talking a little bit about all the different critical technology areas. When you think about, and I mentioned this in my preamble, all this technology evolution that's taking place, and it's not just in AI, it's across a wide range of technology domains. What are the ones that you think are most critical? And then I'd open up to the rest of the panel if others have thoughts on what are the ones we absolutely have to get right and ensure that the appropriate capabilities exist across the DIB.
So I'm going to give Ellen a lot of credit, because when she was at the department, she really focused a lot on software. It's something that we do really poorly in the department. And the reason why software is so important is it's more than just AI. It's the fabric, right? It's the fabric in which we got to push all that data, that we got to generate that knowledge, that we got to deliver it to the war fighters or to the president in order to make critical decisions. Our information structures are not suited for those real-time based systems. And as we kind of go forward, while everybody's enthusiastic about AI, you can't really use AI unless you have the digital twins that you can actually have the comms that are going to be there when you're going to need it. That you can't, even get your production, your manufacturing, your supply chains working without that fabric. So, look, there's a lot. When we created America's Frontier Fund, the department gave us 80 critical technologies. Right. And now it's going to be reduced down to they said, well, we're going to reduce it to 18, and now we may reduce it down to 6. And ironically, that list is pretty much everything. Yeah. And then you look at that list, and you say, this list is identical to the PRC's list, which is identical to the European list.
Yeah, so how meaningful is that really? Exactly. I think taking those technologies and applying them is what's very important, because we have all these weapon systems, if you will, that are hardware enabled, but the hardware is going to be around for decades sometimes. Sometimes some of these aircraft we have are 50, 60 years old, but they're software enabled, and we have to be able to turn that software on a routine basis. But to make use of that software and then of agents and AI, the department has to realize that its most valuable asset is actually the data. And the data is stuck away in all of these different servers and different systems that don't speak to one another. Yeah. So until we become digitally literate, both with our data so that we can train models on them and do whatever, and understand where we are, we're not going to be able to move quickly. And although it's not nearly as kind of sexy as war fighting, when you talk about the business systems that enable us to get all of this, we are operating with decades-old technology. Yeah. And part of our dysfunction, I think, as a government industry ecosystem is that everything goes back to funding. Where are the dollars flowing? And right now, the way our system works with planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, 99% of the people do not understand how to read justification books or even where to go and get them. And one of the things we really need to do is digitize those J-books so that everyone can search them, sort them, understand where all the funding is, what to go after, instead of paying third parties to go through it and figure it out. And oh, by the way, if you want markups quickly, why wouldn't you have the staffers go in and just mark right up in the digital J-books, send it back through secure enclaves?
And particularly in the new world that we live in, look, over 50% of our dollars goes to platforms that are over 30 years old. Just think about that. If you go out to the Ukraine right now, you look at what they're flying, what they're using, many of those systems have less than a 2-month lifespan. Right? You can't have everybody running around with laptops, right, with their own little devices. They can't talk to each other. Sure. They're incompatible. And so if we're going to get into a modern world of attritables and waves and all the swarming technologies, the way we in the department currently are buying things and have been buying things are ill-suited.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything has to be interoperable. Like your question was, what's the most critical technology? But I think, as we're all saying, it's not about the one technology, but how they all fit together, right? What can be plug in, play, what's best of breed, and I think that's best for the government, right? They want to swap out technologies. Maybe something's not moving fast enough or good enough, but it's really about those like interoperable frameworks.
And we're always looking for the perfect solutions.
Right.
I mean, I was looking...
Which there might not be one, right? So you have to change it.
You know, you look
We're still
again,
looking for it.
not that Ukraine's a proxy for everything, but they're doing pretty well on the attritable drone front, right? And who's in those factories building the hardware that we try to make oh so perfect and beautiful? It's high school kids and grandmothers, and a lot of them actually have chunks of styrofoam. I mean, these aren't glitzy things, but they're getting the job done.
Suzanne, distilling your comment, you could think of it instead as critical capabilities that are enabled by critical technologies, but really the focus should be on the capability. And I saw something recently that was talking about, a lethality kill chain it's one part sensing for information and data collection, it's one part AI for decisioning on that data, and then it's autonomous systems for the kinetic effect. And that's bringing 3 different, very important critical technologies together to form a capability.
AJ, if I may, and 100%, before the exquisite software and hardware is operating, you brought up a very good point. We have to have hardened Western supply chain, vertical integration. But what we have to get right is the manned systems teaming with the unmanned systems. Absolutely. If you look across the globe, we could be looking at armed conflict on multiple fronts. Some of the adversaries have some extremely sophisticated weapons. I'm talking about hypersonics. We have to respect that. So to keep our people safe, we have to have the unmanned systems. And I'm not talking about just maritime. It's near and dear to my heart. But we're also seeing it across the multi-domains, especially with air.
Okay, so this is maybe a good segue. Let's start to get into what do we do to fix it part of the conversation. And to the audience, just a reminder, I've got an iPad up here with questions coming to me real time. Please feel free to add any questions if you'd like to be more engaged with the conversation. Ellen, I'll come back to you again here. You said things are a little sporty. My sense on some of the acquisition and sustainment process reform, there's been a lot of paper-pushed EOs, policy directives. Is it sticky enough? What other reforms do we need to see for durable change to the DIB?
Well, I think it's easy to say what we're not going to do and what we should do, but we need people to double down on 2 or 3 initiatives and make it happen. And right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the building as to what priorities are. I think a lot of the PEOs are concerned about leaning forward too much. Contracting officers don't want to put money on contract because everyone's waiting for the national defense strategy to come out, for instance. And we're not going to talk about details of Golden Dome until it doesn't. And that goes on and on and on. So I think what we frankly have to do is get down to first principles and have everyone every day try to figure out how to work with those PEOs to quickly field capability. And that might mean using other transaction authorities, it might be middle tier of acquisition, it might be using a SIBR, whatever it is, we need to encourage people to take risk and move and make mistakes. Maybe they're going to make mistakes, but one of our one of my biggest concerns is we don't choose winners. Somebody comes in with a big idea, and then let's do an RFI on that, and then let's do an RFP, and then let's debate it, and then let's worry about who's going to protest it, and on and on and on, and we're just not moving forward with alacrity.
We'll come back to the picking winners thing here, I think, in a minute. One thing I wanted to cue off on, you were talking about the risk aversion in the culture.
Yeah.
I think, you can advance policy directives all day long, but the people are the ones who are playing the game. So even if the playing field looks different, if people have been trained to play the same way for 2 decades, it's really, really hard.
Yeah,
the change management task ahead is
with
similar.
no disrespect to the major primes, I don't think anyone ever got fired for awarding a contract to one of the major primes, because it's a safe place to go. We'll always need the major primes, but you know what? We need those mid-tiers, we need those smalls, we need all that innovation to happen, and we've got to figure out how to do that.
Yeah. Okay, let's come to capital. Gilman, you said some things about we need scale capital. I agree with you. One thing I worry about in particular is we're seeing a lot of activity at the Series A and Series B. For the audience, this is on the earlier stage of kind of the venture cycle for a company. But now when you need $100, $200, $300 million, like what sources of capital are available to you? What are your thoughts on how that's going to mature and what change needs to happen there?
I think there's a range of tools that we got to start using that other countries are using. Right? I mean, it's ironic that most of the venture dollars these days, if you trace back its sources, are coming from sovereign wealth funds, right? Which means we're using other countries' money to give us capital to build the stuff we can't. Now, if we can get that on an ongoing basis and it'll be reliable, that's great. But the challenge is the priorities for the United States. For those things where we need to scale up versus upstart or coming up with a great idea, the U.S. government needs to be a good partner. And I really think underneath the current administration, they're really trying to move out ahead, right? They're not stuck necessarily in this old model where you always have to have primes and you always have to have subs. I think the most satisfying thing that's coming out of the department is there's a bias towards action and getting things done. So they're much more oriented for capabilities online by a certain day at scale. And that's a real refreshing way of looking at the problem. But as Ellen says, you got to get the rest of the enterprise, including the Congress, to be oriented that way. And if they're not, then I feel sorry for the contracting officers because they're stuck in the middle. Right? They're the ones who say, well, on one hand, I'm responsible if something goes wrong on this acquisition and I didn't use the FAR right, so I don't want to take the risk. On the other hand, I'm getting beaten. Why is this program 3 years behind schedule? And oh, by the way, there's no funding because we're going to be in the CR.
Well, and this is part of it. The building is not good, and this in large part is due to Congress, but also to DOD or DOW. We do not have a long-term demand signal. So if you see 1 year funding, okay, we have multi-years now and a few munitions and so forth. How do you go to your board and say, I need to make an investment in infrastructure, whether it be building, equipment, maybe some tooling, without knowing whether you're going to use it in the future? And that's the reason to come back to dual use technologies, where there's more of a consistent commercial market, and then you can surge when you need to, upgrading, if you want to call it that, or hardening systems for defense use. But that's why, getting back to this dual use, it's so important. But another challenge here, and we haven't talked about this, is the supply chain. When you're a prime, whatever level prime you are, because of contract privity, you can only see 1 or 2 layers down in your supply chain. And typically for the things we're talking about, it's 6, 7, 8, 9 layers. And what we as a country have not understood is there are very simple things like fasteners and diodes, different things that use certain critical minerals that are constrained right now, that everyone, if you do the supply chain illumination, all these different companies are going to that, and that's constraining the build and constraining our ability to take these emerging technologies, transition them into capabilities, and field them. So a big part of getting this ecosystem moving at speed, at the scale we need, because we're really good at doing onesies and twosies, but we're talking scale here. We need to really understand those supply chains and see where the constraints are and focus on that a little bit more.
What's ironic on the supply chains is that, and I think this is a problem we have on the USG side because we think we're special. If you go out to Apple, you go out to Walmart, right? They have their supply chain analytics down to a T, down to who's providing the cotton that makes your Hanes underpants kind of quality. And they know there's a problem going to be on the way. So we as the government need to stop saying, well, we're so exquisite and special, and everything needs to have our special fingerprints on it. When the rest of the market, logistically, operationally, supply chain management side, those will solve problems.
Yeah, but you know what, there's a problem that we've created in the government just very quickly here as well, that a lot of these things aren't so special, the fasteners, but what we've done with our systems within defense is we have all of these different specifications for all this stuff, and little companies that could provide them say, I'm not going to go and qualify the same fastener to 52 different specs. It's not, I don't have the margin to be able to do that, and we don't seem to have the intestinal fortitude, although we've done it in small amounts within the department, to say, forget that, get beyond the mill standards, let's just specify what we need to.
So much good stuff there. I want to come back to Susanne and Nick in a minute on the, government needs to clarify the demand signal to industry. But a question from the audience, and it relates to the picking winners and the critical minerals point, so we'll bring it all together. The government is now a shareholder in MP Materials, a critical minerals company. There's an offtake agreement that's a part of the investment, and there's a bunch of debt that they've put on it. I'm curious, Gilman or others, anyone, how do you view this? Maybe not specifically opining on the transaction, but the idea of the government doing these types of things. It's, on one hand, you could argue it is the government picking a winner. There could be a chilling effect for venture capital dollars then going to other companies in the space. Let's open it up and would love thoughts on it.
I think you got to be selective on doing it, right? Critical minerals is obvious because nobody wants to put the money into the critical minerals area, processing or refining or even extraction, if at the end of the day the Chinese are going to come in and undermine you, right? So in those particular areas, having the U.S. government dollars say, hey, we're going to guarantee the offtake, that opens up those companies for lower cost of capital from debt markets and other markets that align with the U.S. government. Now, in the areas that have immense competition, the U.S. government should say, look, the market's going to let it drive. I don't need to put my fingers in on that. So I think it's appropriate when it's selective.
Yeah. And the government created this problem by having such onerous regulations, whether it be to build a plant or emissions. I mean, no one wants to overpollute and so forth, but we have made manufacturing so difficult in this country.
But it's not federal. It's like, okay, the feds could say it's fine, but the state objects. The state says it's fine, but the local objects.
Yeah, it's just the regulatory process is really difficult because with these critical minerals, it's not so much finding them and getting them out of the ground, it's the processing that we pushed offshore.
Great. So Susanne, Nick, back to you two on the importance of clarifying the demand signal. How have you found that? How do your businesses manage that part? I imagine, as Ellen said before, being dual use is very important. I don't know who wants to go first. You guys are pretty much a pure play defense tech company, as I understand.
Yeah, sure.
So different angles at this problem. Yeah.
We understand things change. That's part of life. But I think a consistent message is fair. But I'd also say healthy competition, fair competition. We absolutely welcome that. What we're seeing from the government, we're quite enthusiastic about. There previously hasn't been maritime representation within the National Security Council. I think people do realize that acquisition cycles need to be much quicker. There are OTAs. We're sometimes seeing SSJs. What's actually making it really fun is that we're having government counterparts come to us and they're enthusiastic about embracing new tech. And I'm not talking about unnecessary risk. But hey, let's do a demo. Let's get the engineers together, come to Austin, take a look at our products, let's get on the water, let's figure a project, let's do a project together. And then I'm very confident that we will transition. That is kind of the model that we found success with, and frankly, it is fun.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that model of getting your capabilities into the hands of users, getting their feedback, kind of that quick iteration is really important because Otherwise, what we've seen in the past is the government will spend like 5 years coming up with a bunch of requirements. Then it's released to industry. There's RFIs, there's RFPs, and there's CDR and PDR and all these things. And by the time we deliver something, the requirements are meaningless, right? And so getting those capabilities, kind of matching the users with the technology and kind of iterating live, I think is really important. And then I agree, it creates some competition. And I think the kind of best defense tech companies now, they like competition. Like I think it's an inherently competitive group of people.
Called capitalism, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's good. It's good for the companies. It gets good capabilities out there. And so I think that's all positive.
So let's pull on the, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things, when I was working with Ellen on the Defense Innovation Board and working with companies like Lockheed or Anduril or some of the other companies, Palantir, is that we've created now a new system where there are too many bodies between the warfighter and the technology people and the manufacturing. And the problem with that is we get it. We want to have a fair system. We want to have a system that's safe. We want to do all those things. But we're in a competition. And that competition means that if we don't have our new systems up online by 2027, 2028, it will be a very bad day for the United States. And we need a bias to hit those schedules and capabilities. And when I go into a meeting and I'm sitting there and I'm talking to the engineers who have never actually talked to the warfighter on the other side, but there's 14 other people in the middle that you have to go through to get to that warfighter, that is not biased to action.
Yeah, we need to simplify things. I mean, again, it's good that we said from a requirements point of view, we're not going to use the JSIDS process anymore. We said we're not going to use the Office of Operational Test and Evaluation, but we haven't delegated the authority back to service secretaries or whoever it might be to say this is good enough. So that's where we've done part of the job, but everybody's kind of in this gray zone, not knowing where to go. And that's where the opportunity is. So I think a lot of this just comes down to leadership. We need leadership in the Pentagon to step up and own a couple issues and show what right looks like and get a couple kind of reps and sets and some wins, and then I think everyone will be on board.
Yep. Let's come back to the competition point. I wanted to touch on Golden Dome, which also came up before. Susanne, Nick, what do you think, or anyone really, what do you think about Golden Dome? It's it's not unprecedented, but it's not common for the government to put out a solicitation with this playoff style, the winner's advance type of thing over a lot of time where the startups are essentially putting their own dollars at risk for the development. Is that more of the model that we want to be going towards? Do so selectively, not at all? Curious.
I think so. I think Golden Dome, critically important. It's very good for Team America and frankly, our most important allies. But to your point, AJ, about kind of like how the VC piece comes into it. I'll give an example. In April of this year, Saronic bought a shipyard in Louisiana. In May, we were building from the keel up a 150-foot vessel. That vessel is going to be in the water in December, early January. And then we're going to put $250 million into the shipyard. That kind of speed, that is what is going to need to make Golden Dome a reality. We can't, frankly, we have to execute now.
Yeah, and I think for things like Golden Dome, it's taking existing capabilities and bringing them together, right? There are already systems and programs and technology that do a lot of great missile warning and missile defense, and so a lot of it's bringing together and accelerating those commercial capabilities. We don't, like we've all talked about, we don't have time to build new things, and we don't need to. But we do need to think about that interoperability, right? Bringing all of those systems and information
But there are
together.
space interceptors, which are going to be, that's the new part of Golden Dome, right?
Yeah, there's a whole range of things. But what's fascinating about these new models, and everybody talks about the startups and the prime, but there's another group, I would put your company in there, in the kind of upstart areas, where these are sophisticated companies with capabilities. And the beauty about the upstarts is this concept that none of these companies are waiting for the US government to write a spec, right? Didn't go in and you didn't go to the shipyard and say, can you get the OW approval for this particular line and approve every part of our process? They just went off and built it, right? Anduril goes off and says, hey, Palmer goes, I got this idea, and he doesn't wait for Congress to authorize dollars after an RFI and RFP process. He builds it. Now, the flip side of that, because the VCs or the private equity guys are taking all the risks, is they don't have to play underneath that cost-plus model. So there's a risk reward already built into that system. But we need to get the system to get off of this 4-year planning process. 4 years, 1-year contracts are not the way to finance these big capabilities that we need. Because look, if Golden Dome gets built, and it will, right? It's not only going to require billions, it's going to require the talent attraction to build out those systems. And nobody's going to go to a place if, you might get the contract this week, or you're in an OTA next week, and then, the PEO changes and you're gone. That's a bridge that nobody wants to cross.
Yeah. There was a question that came in from Nick, one of your comments about, we read the requirements and start building. This really is for everybody. In the question here, it remarks that our adversaries are also seeing those requirements. And what's the panel's feel for the right balance between securing the DIB and encouraging more speed in the cycles by making those requirements, or with JSID's now gone, something else more visible?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We have to. It's not America only. This is much bigger than. We have to lean in hard with the other allies. I mean, some of these countries have tremendous shipbuilding capability, tremendous workforce. They have to be a part of this. America will obviously play a key part of it. Saronic will always have a massive production presence in the United States, but oceans are big, so it does make sense to look at, just from a logistical framework, what we might have to do. I think a lot of people probably served or are active duty. People understand the importance of the logistics.
I think where we get it wrong is we are very prescriptive about the solution with 50 gazillion KPIs and so forth, instead of saying, here's the gap in capability we have. Come to us with ideas. You can articulate, open source all day what the gap in capability is. You can have quiet meetings on what the solution is. And until we get to that, that's where other transaction authorities started, where not only to kind of get away from the DFAR process, but where you don't have a hard and fast requirement. And I think that's where we see the innovative spirit come up.
I agree. We also see creep back to this practice issue of people so used to just providing the specification. Sure. The authority exists to not give the specification and more describe the problem.
In my view, that's a leadership problem. That's a lack of leadership, because what's happening is you're not demanding that we do things differently. We're not training people to be able to do that. We're not rewarding people. And I think, Congress has a little bit of work to do here, because when something goes wrong, what happens? You haul people up to the Hill, you have a hearing, all the cameras are there, and most normal human beings don't want to go through that excitement in their life. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to do that. Or if you're in uniform, you don't want to jeopardize your next promotion. So there's a whole culture issue here we have to deal with.
And I also think people get confused between problems and solutions. 95% of the problems out there are not classified. They don't need to be classified. In fact, we don't want it to be classified. We want to do a couple things, right? We want to let, in some ways, our adversary know, right? They need to follow us because we're not following them. That gives us an advantage. Second, solutions. Many of the solutions, are sensitive and need to be protected. Other solutions is a race between our systems, the Chinese systems, the Russian systems, and the European systems. A world in which our adversaries are selling their missiles, their aircraft, their ships is not helping the United States.
And there's a lot of deterrence in just showing capability.
Well, and if we're focused on speed, then we have to maybe make some trade-offs there, right, in terms of going with commercial capabilities that are ready now.
I also think it's worth noting that this is really hard. Suzanne's in Leo and Geo, and we have 30 boats operating together autonomously. It is hard, right? It's new technology. We're looking for those partners there's highs and lows of a partnership, but it is new, it is difficult.
Yeah.
And that's why we need the user involved, going back to what we were talking about earlier, all those people in the
14
middle,
steps, yeah.
Who's really necessary for the value add to get it done.
Early stage companies in particular, just getting access to the end user and being able to shoulder surf, do the customer journey mapping is so important, but also sometimes so hard. And levels of classification and all of the other things that you have to do to get to that thing, definitely a barrier there that needs to come down to some degree. Nick, you mentioned partnerships. I want to talk about this topic with the whole panel. When we think about the future of the DIB, America First is the current zeitgeist. But in my opinion, there's going to be a role for our allies and other foreign partners. Curious, if there is a thought on like the ideal composition, where do we build, where do we borrow, partner, however you want to think of it?
I mean, I think it's very complicated. You ideally want to have people that get along, that it's 50-50, the data rights are figured out, the locations make sense. But, it is important to stress, like, the partnerships are up and down. It's not like, if I sell AJ, I sell you a boat and I never see you again, that's fine. That's not what I want. I would want to work with you, improve, iterate. That's what we have to do. It's also, there's something to be said about the 80% solution. This is something I kind of draw back on, CIA days. If you just tinker and we stay in the shipyard and we have to make it perfect, and then Ellen comes in with a work order that changes it, and then Susanne changes it. Now we're looking at 10, 11 years for building platforms. Let's get them into the field. Let's iterate. Let's get them to that 100%. But I think that's very, very important.
And it's a real cost to do that. I mean, I won't tell you which big prime it was, but basically had a Ukrainian company that was building these drones, right? $3,000 to $15,000 per drone. Okay, so we have the program in the department to go out and do rapid acquisition. So of course, because we have this kind of crazy prime-sub relationships, the Ukrainian company said, we'll be the sub because we don't know how to operate in your US DOW kind of framework. So the prime came in, re-specified that drone, and then bid it back to the department at $80,000 per drone, and they lost the bid. Yet those $3,000 and $15,000 drones are crushing the Russians every single day.
Quantity has a quality all of its
exactly.
own. Right?
And if you, like, these are one-way vehicles, but maybe they don't have 8 9s. Maybe they have 2 8s.
Yeah.
But I'm flying 60 drones per wave, and I only need 5 to get there, right? Then why am I paying $80,000 a drone?
Yeah.
So we just need to rethink the operational use, and this is the danger when people who write specs and people who manage programs don't talk to warfighters.
Going back to this whole issue of partners and allies, I think we are getting it wrong in some ways in that, for instance, Australia is so geopolitically important to us. If you look at the distance between Washington and Beijing, Hawaii's in the middle of it. There's a long way to go if we are trying to get assets forward deployed, if we are trying to bring assets home to maintain them, and so forth. We can't do it with that tyranny of distance. So why aren't we being a little bit more open in terms of ITAR regulations? There's still so many things on the excluded list, even with AUKUS, to allow US primes, particularly who want to share intellectual property along with everyone else with Australian companies where there's not only the capital available to invest in whether it be a shipyard or a manufacturing plant, and there's the capacity and the capability to develop that manufacturing base. Right now, that's incredibly constrained because we will not give up the intellectual property to do that. And there are just many examples of PEOs being pulled in to say, hey, what about this or that? And they're scared to go offshore and do something. Whereas we need munitions forward deployed. We need ships forward deployed.
Yeah.
We need to be able to repair.
We're getting short on time. And Ellen, you said something that I think it's a good segue to the last thing I'd like to touch on, which you said quality or quantity is quality, essentially, or potentially. There's capability in numbers. How do we measure success? What are the right metrics? And what's the right time frame? And maybe it could be different. What's the realistic time frame? Maybe I don't know who wants to take that first. But let's
Other
all, I'd love,
timeframe,
yeah, okay.
And then I'll let the other folks. Look, the timeframe is pretty straightforward. We have to have capabilities online between 2027 and 2035. That's the window, right? And as you pointed out, our number of ships are going down, and our ability to build, right, isn't filling that particular gap. We know what our adversaries are doing. So that's the window, and if you're optimizing what's the best solutions to keep the adversary at bay that we can put into the field or in our capabilities in that window that defines what we need.
The time frame is yesterday. I think that's when it was. What does success looks like? It looks like reestablishing deterrence. And you know, frankly, it might sound a little hawkish, but all I hear about is adversarial red lines. Well, guess what? America also has red lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the mission, right? We've talked a lot about cost and scale and speed, but ultimately success is the mission and the deterrence, I think.
We haven't really talked about space much today, a little bit here with Maxar, but I will tell you, I think time has run out in space, which is the last contested domain. A lot of commercial assets up there, very unclear what's a national security payload, what's, you know, a commercial bus, whatever it might be. Our adversaries are hiding in plain sight. There are a lot of kind of dead things circulating up there that come to life every now and then. I think we are way out of time in space, and we need to accelerate. And I think success means having that conversation and getting the best of commercial industry in with the best of defense industry and working together to quickly field capability. And again, that's where quantity has a quality all of its own.
Amen. So much more that we could potentially discuss. And I asked for questions and got flooded with them. There was no way to weave them all in, but thank you so much. And thank you. Please join me in a round of applause for the panelists here.
Please welcome to the stage Susanne Wilson Heckenberg, President, Intelligence and National Security Alliance, and Louis Shepard, Chair, AFCEA, Intelligence Committee.
Take 7 steps forward. I want to thank you, AJ, and thanks to Ellen and Gilman and Susanne and Nick for a fascinating performance. Thanks so much, Ellen. Thank you. And what this does is it's a fitting way to close the summit. Over the past 2 days, we've talked, including deeply in this panel, about the transformative power of technology, the rapid pace of change, and the urgent need to get mission systems online quickly and effectively. These are not abstract conversations, as you saw. They are the decisions and partnerships that will shape our national security for years to come. Let's give one more round of applause, please, for all of the team, for our speakers, our moderators, and the IC leaders who have shared their insights with us. Thank you very much.
And as we close out, equally as important are the INSA and AFCEA teams who have been working over the past 12 months to deliver the past 2 days of programming. A special thanks to Ray Cross, John Doyen, Peggy O'Connor, who has put a tremendous amount of sweat equity into the programming, as well as Gretchen Gunning and Toya Rich, Allie Bailey, Bree Baker, and Tina Vicicio. And let's give a round of applause for INSA's graduate student interns, Emma Frazier and Kate Tobin, who were instrumental in making the event a success while also going to school full-time. A round of applause for those folks.
Go to the next part. Let's go to finishing.
But also, most of all, I really want to thank our participants in this year's program. This summit is proof of what happens when government, industry, and academia come together with a shared sense of mission. Technology may be advancing faster than ever, but it's the relationships, the trust, and the dialogue in this room that make all of this possible. And on behalf of everyone at AFCEA, I want to thank you all for your time and energy the past couple of days. Our commitment to keep creating spaces like this where government, industry can come together and tackle the toughest challenges we are still intent upon. It's a great opportunity to relax, connect with your colleagues and friends, and we look forward to seeing you all next year. Safe travels to everyone and have a great weekend.